The water hit Staff Sergeant Yolanda Mbeki at chest height before she could grab the rope. 14 hours of relentless rain had turned the Euphrates tributary into a weapon, and now it was dragging her toward the collapsed bridge where 3 insurgents had pinned down her reconnaissance team. Her rifle case was strapped across her back. Waterproof. The only thing between her squad and extraction was 800 meters of flooded terrain and 3 men with automatic weapons who did not know a sniper was swimming toward them. She fought the current with everything she had, arms burning as she pulled herself along a half-submerged concrete barrier. The water was brown and thick with debris, chunks of wood and metal scraping against her legs as they rushed past. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Private First Class Amara Osei screaming. Yolanda turned. Osei was 20 meters back, clinging to a twisted piece of rebar with one arm. The other arm hung limp at her side, blood mixing with the floodwater in dark ribbons. The youngest member of the team, 20 years old, 3 months in country. She was losing her grip. The mission was forward. The team needed those insurgents eliminated. Every second Yolanda delayed was another second her squad stayed pinned under fire. She was already swimming back before she made the conscious decision. The current fought her the whole way, trying to push her toward the bridge, toward the enemy, toward the easy path of letting the water decide. She refused. Stroke by stroke, she closed the distance until her fingers wrapped around Osei's vest and pulled. The private was heavier than she looked, dead weight with shock setting in. Yolanda kicked toward a collapsed building where the second floor jutted above the waterline like a concrete island. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed, but she did not let go. She hauled Osei onto the concrete platform and checked the wound. Through and through on the upper arm, missing the artery by centimeters. Lucky! Yolanda pulled the tourniquet from her vest and went to work, hands steady despite the chaos around her. Before we continue with the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have witnessed someone who had to prove themselves when nobody believed they could. Osei's eyes focused through the pain. "Sergeant," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "They said you could not make this swim. They said the rifle would flood." Yolanda finished the tourniquet and checked it twice. "They say a lot of things." She unstrapped the rifle case from her back and opened it. The M24 lay inside, nestled in waterproof foam, bone dry. She had spent 11 hours preparing this case, sealing every seam, testing it in the FOB shower until the other soldiers thought she had lost her mind. Staff Sergeant Mbeki, they had called her the woman who showers with her rifle. Let them laugh. Her weapon was dry. Their doubts were not her concern. The radio on her vest crackled. "Mbeki, this is Vickers. What is your position?" Staff Sergeant Yolanda Mbeki looked at the collapsed bridge in the distance, at the muzzle flashes still sparking from the insurgent positions, at the flood that stood between her and her mission. She keyed the radio. "I am 800 meters east of the bridge. I have Osei. She is stable but cannot move." Sergeant First Class Darnell Vickers did not bother hiding his irritation. "You were supposed to be in position 10 minutes ago. What is the holdup?" "I stopped to save a team member, Sergeant." The pause that followed said everything his words did not. Vickers had not wanted her on this mission. He had made that clear in the briefing, in the equipment check, in every dismissive glance he sent her direction. She was the only female sniper in the battalion, and Vickers believed that made her a liability. "Get to the eastern approach," he finally said. "Move fast. We are running out of time here." Yolanda looked at the eastern approach. It was the deepest part of the flood, a churning channel where the current ran fastest and the debris piled thickest. No cover, no rest points. A suicide swim that would exhaust her before she ever reached shooting position. She understood exactly why Vickers had assigned it to her. "Copy that," she said. "Moving now." She secured Osei against the concrete, made sure the private could keep her head above water, and slipped back into the flood. The water was colder now, or maybe she was just more tired. She could feel her body heat bleeding away with every stroke. 3 insurgents, 800 meters of hell, a rifle that had to stay dry, or everything was for nothing. Her brother had drowned in water calmer than this. She had been 12, standing on the shore, watching him go under and never come back up. For 17 years, she had carried that memory like a stone in her chest. Water was her enemy. Water was her fear. And now water was the only path to saving her team. She swam. The current grabbed her legs and pulled. Debris slammed against her ribs. The rifle case dragged at her back, trying to push her under. She fought for every meter, every inch, her arms moving in a rhythm that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with refusal. She would not stop. She would not sink. She would not become another body the water claimed. 100 meters in, her hand struck something solid beneath the surface. A submerged vehicle, its roof just below the waterline. She pulled herself onto it, gasping, and checked the rifle case. Still sealed. Still dry. The bridge was closer now. She could see the insurgent positions more clearly. 3 figures moving behind sandbag barriers on the elevated roadway. They had the high ground, the cover, the automatic weapons. They had every advantage. They did not have her. She slipped back into the water and kept moving. The cold was deep in her bones now, slowing her thoughts, making her limbs feel distant and heavy. But the rifle stayed above the surface. The seal held. That was all that mattered. 400 meters to go. Then 300. The current shifted as she entered the main channel, stronger now, more insistent. It wanted to drag her under the bridge, into the killing zone where her team was pinned. She angled away, fighting for the eastern bank where she could find position. Her foot caught on something beneath the surface. She pulled, but it held fast. Wire, maybe, or twisted metal from the collapse. She was stuck, the current pushing her down, the rifle case dragging at her back. She reached for her knife, but the motion threw off her balance. The water surged over her head. Brown darkness swallowed her whole, and she felt the rifle case pulling her deeper, its weight suddenly an anchor instead of a lifeline. Her lungs screamed for air. Her hands scrambled at the obstruction, cutting through whatever held her, fingers going numb in the cold. Above her, the surface was a distant shimmer, getting farther away with every second. The current spun her. She lost her sense of direction. Up and down became meaningless concepts as the flood claimed her the way it had claimed her brother all those years ago. And then her hand found the strap, and she pulled. She kicked with everything she had left. The strap cut into her palm as she hauled the rifle case upward, refusing to let the weight drag her deeper. Her boots found purchase on something solid, a chunk of concrete or a submerged vehicle, and she pushed off hard. Her head broke the surface, and she gasped, sucking air into lungs that burned like fire. The current still pulled at her legs, still tried to claim her, but she was moving now, stroking toward a half-collapsed wall that jutted from the water like a broken tooth. Her fingers scraped concrete and held. She hung there for a moment, chest heaving, rain hammering her face. The rifle case was still on her back, still sealed. She had not let go. The radio crackled against her chest. Becky report. Vickers sounded annoyed, not concerned. She could picture him behind cover somewhere, watching the bridge, counting the seconds she was wasting. She coughed water and keyed the mic. Still moving. Eastern approach. You are behind schedule. We have wounded here. Osei is not the only one. The words hit harder than the current. She had known the team was pinned, but wounded meant the situation was worse than the initial reports. Wounded meant people bleeding out while she fought the flood. Who else, she asked. Delgado took shrapnel. He is stable, but we need extraction and we cannot get it until those positions are neutralized. So move faster, Staff Sergeant. She wanted to tell him that she was moving as fast as humanly possible, that the flood was fighting her every meter, that she had already saved one life and nearly lost her own. But Vickers would not care about any of that. Vickers only cared about results, and the only result that mattered was 3 dead insurgents. Copy, she said. Moving. She released the wall and let the current carry her for a moment, angling her body to use its force instead of fighting it. The eastern approach was 100 meters ahead, a flooded channel between 2 collapsed buildings that would give her a path to the far bank. Vickers had chosen it because it was the most dangerous route, the one most likely to kill her or exhaust her before she reached position. He was testing her, or punishing her, maybe both. A new voice broke through the static. "Becky, this is Delgado. You copy." Specialist Tomas Delgado Ruiz was the team's radio operator, a 23-year-old from El Paso who talked too much and worried too loudly. Right now his voice was strained with pain, but steady. "I copy, Delgado. Heard you caught some shrapnel. Just a scratch. Listen, I have eyes on the Eastern Channel from here. There's a current break about 60 meters in, behind what looks like a delivery truck stuck on a median. You can rest there, catch your breath." Vickers does not know about it. She understood what he was offering. A moment of respite that their team leader had not sanctioned. A small act of solidarity that could get Delgado in trouble if Vickers found out. "Copy that," she said. "Appreciate the intel." She heard Vickers in the background, demanding to know who Delgado was talking to. The specialist's response was garbled, lost in static that sounded just a little too convenient to be natural. Delgado was covering for her. It was a small thing, but it mattered. In a team where she had been treated as an outsider since day one, where her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, Delgado had chosen to help her. He believed she could make this mission work. She would not let him down. The Eastern Channel was worse than she expected. The current ran faster here, funneled between the buildings into a churning rapids that tore at her body. Debris came at her without warning, forcing her to dodge and weave while keeping the rifle case above water. A wooden beam struck her shoulder and spun her around. A tangle of wire wrapped around her ankle and nearly pulled her under again. But she found the truck. Delgado had been right. Behind the submerged vehicle, the water eddied into something almost calm, a pocket of stillness in the chaos. She wedged herself against the truck's cab and let herself breathe. Her arms were shaking. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The cold had worked its way so deep into her muscles that she was not sure they would answer when she needed them again. But she was still moving, still fighting, still refusing to let the water win. She checked the rifle case for the third time. The seals held. The M24 was dry. 11 hours of preparation, of testing every joint and seam, of enduring the mockery of soldiers who thought she was paranoid. None of them had believed a rifle could survive this kind of immersion. None of them had been willing to try. Yolanda had grown up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where nobody expected anything from girls who looked like her. She had been told her whole life what she could not do, what she should not try, what was beyond her reach. The Army was supposed to be different. The Army was supposed to be about performance, about results, about what you could do rather than who you were. But here she was, fighting through a flood to prove she belonged, while her team leader waited for her to fail. The radio crackled again. "Becky, this is Vickers. I am looking at the eastern bank from here. There is a position about 200 meters north of the bridge, elevated concrete, good sight lines. That is your destination. You have 15 minutes to get there and set up." She studied the terrain from her hiding spot. The position Vickers described was real, but getting there meant crossing another 100 meters of open water with no cover. If the insurgents spotted her, she would be dead before she could reach her rifle. There was another option. 60 meters south of the position Vickers had chosen, a collapsed building created a maze of concrete and rebar that extended almost to the waterline. It would be harder to shoot from, more obstructed, but infinitely safer to reach. Vickers had not mentioned it. Either he had not seen it, or he wanted her in the exposed position. "Copy," she said, moving to designated position. She would decide when she got closer. For now, she needed to move. The water fought her every stroke as she left the shelter of the truck. The current wanted to drag her toward the bridge, toward the insurgent positions, toward the easy death of giving up and letting the flood decide. She refused. Every meter was a battle. Every breath was a victory. Halfway across the open water, she heard the sound that changed everything. Engines, coming from upstream. She dove, pulling herself beneath the surface as a patrol boat rounded the bend. Through the murky water, she could see its shadow passing overhead, could hear the muffled voices of the men aboard. They were searching the flood for survivors. Or for her. She held her breath and waited, lungs burning, body screaming for air. The boat passed directly above her position, so close she could have reached up and touched its hull. The rifle case pressed against her back, its weight suddenly comforting. If they found her, at least she would have a dry weapon. The shadow moved on. The engine noise faded. She counted to 30 before she surfaced, gasping, and looked for the boat. It had stopped 200 meters upstream. The men aboard were pointing at something in the water, arguing about what they had seen. She had to move now before they turned around, before they spotted her in the open. She swam. The collapsed building was closer than the position Vickers had assigned. She made the decision without hesitation, angling toward the maze of concrete and rebar that promised cover. If Vickers wanted to court-martial her for choosing survival over obedience, he could do it after she saved his life. She reached the first chunk of debris and pulled herself onto it, staying low, keeping the rifle case between her body and the patrol boat upstream. The men were still arguing, still pointing at whatever had caught their attention. She had maybe 60 seconds before they resumed their search. The concrete maze was treacherous. Rebar jutted at angles that threatened to tear her uniform and flesh. Gaps between slabs opened onto churning water that would drag her under if she slipped. But it was cover, real cover, and she moved through it with the patience of a woman who had spent 2 years learning to be invisible. She found a pocket where 2 slabs had fallen against each other, creating a small cave just above the waterline. She wedged herself inside and went still, controlling her breathing, becoming nothing more than another shadow in the wreckage. The patrol boat's engine revved. She heard it moving, coming closer, and she pressed herself deeper into the concrete embrace. Through a gap in the slab, she watched the boat pass, its occupants scanning the debris field with flashlights despite the daylight. They were looking for something specific, looking for her. One of the beams swept across her hiding spot and kept moving. She did not breathe, did not blink. The boat continued downstream, toward the bridge, and she let herself exhale only when the engine noise had faded to nothing. She was shaking, not from cold this time, though the cold was still there, deep in her bones. This was something older, something she had carried since she was 12 years old, standing on the shore of Lake Michigan, watching the water swallow her brother whole. His name was Marcus. He had been 9 years old, fearless in the way that only children can be, convinced that the waves were a game he could win. She had been supposed to watch him. She had been supposed to keep him safe. But she had looked away for one moment, just one moment, and when she looked back, he was gone. They found his body 3 days later, 2 miles down the shore. She had not been allowed to see it. Her mother had held her while she screamed, had whispered words that were supposed to be comforting, but only made the guilt cut deeper. "It was not your fault," her mother had said. "The water took him. The water takes what it wants." But Yolanda knew the truth. She had failed him. She had looked away, and he had died. For 17 years, she had carried that failure like a stone in her chest. She had joined the army to prove she could protect people, to become someone who never looked away, who never let the moment slip past. She had fought for a sniper slot because snipers controlled the battlefield from a distance, because they saw everything and missed nothing, because they never let the chaos get close enough to matter. And now here she was, in the water again, fighting the same enemy that had taken Marcus. The flood wanted her the same way Lake Michigan had wanted her brother. It wanted to pull her down into the dark and never let her go. She would not let it. She checked the rifle case. Still dry, still sealed. The M24 waited inside, patient and deadly, ready to do its job when she reached position. All she had to do was keep moving. The radio crackled. "Becky, position report." She keyed the mic, keeping her voice low. 200 meters from a bridge. "I am in the debris field south of the designated position." Had to adjust for the patrol boat. Vickers was silent for a long moment. She could imagine his face, the disapproval carved into his features like stone. When he spoke, his voice was ice. "I gave you a specific position, Staff Sergeant, and the patrol boat would have spotted me in the open water. I made a tactical decision. You made a decision to disobey a direct order. She felt the anger rise in her chest, hot against the cold that had settled in her bones. I made a decision to stay alive long enough to complete the mission. You want me dead, or you want those insurgents neutralized? Pick one. The silence stretched longer this time. She heard Delgado say something in the background, too muffled to make out, and then Vickers came back on the line. Get to a shooting position. I do not care where. Just get it done. Copy. She slipped out of her concrete cave and began working her way through the debris field. The position she had in mind was not ideal, a cramped angle between two fallen slabs that would limit her movement, but it had clear sight lines to the bridge and enough cover to keep her hidden. More importantly, she could reach it without exposing herself to the patrol boat when it returned. The water level was still rising. She could see it creeping up the concrete, inch by inch, as the rain continued to fall. The flood was not done with her yet. It had tried to drown her twice and failed, but it was patient in the way that water always was. It would wait. It would keep rising. And eventually, if she did not move fast enough, it would win. She reached the position and settled into it, bracing her body against the concrete. From here, she could see the bridge clearly, could make out the three insurgent positions behind their sandbag barriers. They were confident, firing occasional bursts at her pin team, completely unaware that death was watching them through a rifle scope. She opened the case and lifted out the M24. The weapon was cold but dry, its metal gleaming dully in the gray light. She ran her hands over it with practiced efficiency, checking every component, confirming that the waterproofing had held. The scope was clear. The action was smooth. The rifle was ready. She was 467 meters from the nearest insurgent position. A long shot in perfect conditions. In driving rain, with wind gusting unpredictably, with her body shaking from cold and exhaustion, it would be nearly impossible. Nearly, not completely. She settled the rifle against her shoulder and pressed her eye to the scope. The world narrowed to a circle of magnified clarity, the insurgent positions jumping into sharp focus. She could see faces now, young men with hard eyes, weapons held with the casual confidence of people who thought they were untouchable. They had no idea she was here. No idea that the flood they thought was protecting them had delivered something far more dangerous than debris. She began calculating the shot. Distance, wind speed, bullet drop. The rain would affect trajectory, adding variables that made the math more complex. Her frozen fingers would affect her trigger pull, adding more uncertainty. Everything about this situation was wrong. She would make it right. The radio crackled one more time. Delgado's voice, barely above a whisper. Becky, I can see your position from here. You made it. I made it, she confirmed. Then through the static, words that made the cold feel just a little less brutal. Give them hell, Sergeant. We are all counting on you. She chambered around and took aim. And in the distance, upstream, she heard the patrol boat's engine start again. She pulled back from the scope and pressed herself flat against the concrete. The patrol boat was coming from the north, its engine growling against the current, and she could hear voices carrying across the water. They were not searching randomly anymore. They were methodical, organized. Someone had told them to look harder. Through a gap in the debris, she watched the boat approach. 3 men aboard, 2 with rifles and 1 driving. They moved slowly, pausing every few meters to sweep the wreckage with their flashlights. The beams cut through the rain like blades, probing every shadow, every crevice, every place a person might hide. One of the men pointed directly at the debris field where she lay concealed. He said something to the others, his voice sharp with suspicion. The boat turned toward her. She had maybe 30 seconds before they were close enough to spot her. The rifle was in her hands, but taking a shot now would give away her position to the insurgents on the bridge. 3 men on the boat plus 3 on the bridge meant 6 enemies who would know exactly where she was. The math did not work. She slipped the rifle back into its case and sealed it. Then she lowered herself into the water. The cold hit her like a fist, driving the air from her lungs, but she forced herself deeper. The debris field extended below the surface, a maze of concrete and twisted metal that offered 1,000 places to hide if you were willing to stop breathing. She wedged herself beneath a fallen slab and went still. Above her, the boat's shadow passed. She could hear the muffled thump of boots on the hull, the garbled sound of voices, the scrape of metal as someone poked a rifle barrel into the debris. A flashlight beam pierced the water, sweeping back and forth, and she pressed herself deeper into the shadows. Her lungs began to burn. 30 seconds. 45. A minute. The light kept searching, kept probing, kept looking for the sniper that intelligence had warned them about. She wondered if there was a leak somewhere, if someone at the FOB had talked, if Vickers himself had somehow given her away. It did not matter. What mattered was the next breath, and she could not take it until the boat moved on. The light swept across her hiding spot once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th pass it lingered, catching the edge of her boot, the curve of her shoulder. She saw the beam freeze, heard a muffled shout from above. Then the current shifted. A wave of debris came rushing through the channel, chunks of wood and plastic and unidentifiable wreckage carried by a surge from upstream. It slammed into the boat and sent the men stumbling, their flashlight beams spinning wildly as they fought for balance. By the time they recovered, the water where Yolanda had been hiding was choked with debris, impossible to search. She used the chaos to move, pulling herself along the underside of the concrete slabs, lungs screaming, vision starting to gray at the edges. 10 more meters. 5. Her hand found an air pocket, a small gap where 2 slabs did not quite meet, and she shoved her face into it and gasped. The air was stale and tasted like concrete dust, but it was air. She sucked it in greedily, fighting to control the desperate heaving of her chest. Above her, she could hear the boat moving away, the men arguing about what they had seen. One of them insisted there was someone in the water. The others told him he was jumping at shadows. She waited until the engine noise faded completely before she moved again. When she finally pulled herself back onto the concrete, back into the rain and the gray light, her body was shaking so hard she could barely hold the rifle case. But the case was still sealed. The rifle was still dry, and she was still alive. The radio crackled. "Becky, we saw the boat." Delgado's voice was tight with worry. "Are you hit?" "Negative. I am still in position." Vickers came on the line, and for once his voice held something other than contempt. "That was close, Staff Sergeant." "Too close." She did not bother responding. What was there to say? Yes, it was close. Yes, she had nearly died. Again, that was the mission Vickers had sent her on, the impossible task he had assigned to the woman he did not believe could handle it. She settled back into her shooting position and opened the rifle case. The M24 was still perfect, still ready, still waiting to do what she had trained it to do. She pressed her eye to the scope and found the bridge again. The insurgents had not moved. They were still firing at her team, still confident in their elevated position, still completely unaware that the patrol boat had nearly stumbled onto the thing that would kill them. She watched them through the scope, learning their patterns, memorizing their movements. The one on the north end was the leader, she decided. He moved with authority, gesturing commands to the others. The one in the center was nervous, checking his weapon too often, glancing over his shoulder. The one on the south end was the most dangerous, calm and methodical, scanning the flood with the patience of someone who knew how to wait. She would take the leader first, then the dangerous one, then the nervous one, who would probably run the moment his companions fell. But not yet. The patrol boat was still out there somewhere, and she needed to know where it was before she gave away her position. One shot would bring every enemy in the area down on her location. She had to make sure that when she started shooting, she could finish before they reached her. Delgado's voice came through the radio again, barely above a whisper this time. "Becky, the boat is heading back toward the upstream checkpoint. You have a window." She did not ask how he knew, did not question the intel. Delgado had been watching her back since the mission started, and she trusted him more than she trusted anyone else on this team. "How long?" she asked. "Maybe 20 minutes before they circle back. Maybe less. 20 minutes to take 3 shots and disappear." It was not enough time. Not nearly enough. But it was what she had. She began her breathing exercises, slowing her heart rate, steadying her hands. The cold was still in her bones, but she pushed it away, pushed everything away except the rifle and the target and the math that would guide her bullet home. The leader was 471 meters away. The wind was gusting from the northwest at 12 to 15 miles per hour. The rain would drag her bullet down by approximately 3 inches over that distance. She adjusted her scope, made her calculations, and settled her finger against the trigger. And then she saw movement on the bridge that changed everything. There were more people on the bridge than the 3 insurgents. She adjusted her scope and felt her stomach drop as the figures came into focus. 2 women and a man, hands bound behind their backs, kneeling on the concrete behind the sandbag barriers. Civilians. Hostages. The nervous insurgent in the center position was standing over them, weapon pointed at the back of the nearest woman's head. He was shouting something toward the pinned American position, words she could not hear but could easily imagine. Surrender, or they die. Come out, or we execute them one by one. She keyed her radio. Vickers. There are hostages on the bridge. 3 civilians bound and a guard. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. When Vickers finally responded, his voice was flat. Confirmed. We saw them bring the hostages up 10 minutes ago. Aid workers from the flooding evacuation. And you did not think to mention this. It does not change your mission, Staff Sergeant. Those insurgents need to be neutralized. She stared through the scope at the woman with a gun to her head. The woman was young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Her eyes were closed, and her lips were moving. Praying, probably. Preparing for death. It changes everything, Yolanda said. I cannot take a shot that might hit a hostage, then figure out a shot that will not. Vickers' voice hardened. Those are your orders. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him that combat was not a math problem, that bullets did not always go where you aimed them, that one wrong calculation could put a round through an innocent woman's skull instead of her captor's. But Vickers did not care about any of that. Vickers only cared about results. She pulled back from the scope and pressed her forehead against the cold concrete. The water was still rising around her, creeping up toward her position inch by relentless inch. She had maybe 40 minutes before it reached her rifle. Maybe less. 40 minutes to figure out how to kill 3 men without killing the 3 people they were hiding behind. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, distant and warm. Water cannot take what fire forged, baby girl. You remember that. It was something her mother had said after Marcus died, after Yolanda had refused to go near water for almost a year. Her mother had taken her to the lake on the anniversary of his death and made her stand at the edge of the shore. You're not water, her mother had said. You are fire. Fire does not run from water. Fire makes water into steam. She had not understood it then. She was not sure she understood it now. But the words had stayed with her through basic training, through infantry school, through the grueling months of sniper qualification when every instructor told her she did not belong. Fire does not run. Fire transforms. She opened her eyes and looked at the flood rising around her. The water wanted her to fail. It wanted her to freeze, to hesitate, to let the doubt creep in and paralyze her the way it had paralyzed her on that shore 17 years ago. But she was not that little girl anymore. She was Staff Sergeant Yolanda Mbeki, and she had not come this far to drown. She pressed her eye to the scope again and studied the bridge with fresh focus. The hostages were kneeling in a line behind the center position. The nervous insurgent was the one guarding them, which meant he was the one she had to take last. The leader on the north end was partially exposed, confident enough in his elevated position to stand rather than crouch. The dangerous one on the south end was more careful, only his head and shoulders visible above the sandbags. If she took the leader first, the dangerous one would react. He would either take cover or start shooting hostages. Neither option was acceptable. But if she took the dangerous one first, the leader would have time to organize a response. The nervous one would panic and might execute the hostages out of fear. She needed to take 2 of them before anyone could react. 2 shots in less than 2 seconds at targets more than 400 meters away in driving rain with frozen hands. Impossible. She had done impossible before. The radio crackled. Becky, this is Delgado. I have been watching the bridge. There's a pattern. She keyed the mic. Talk to me. The leader checks his watch every few minutes. When he does, he looks down and to the right. Takes his eyes off the field for about 3 seconds. And the dangerous one, he stretches his neck every time the leader moves. Looks up at the sky. Same 3 seconds. Yolanda felt something shift in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the cold calculation of a sniper who had found her opening. They sync up, she said. The movements happen at the same time. Every time. I've been counting. Next one should be in about 4 minutes. 4 minutes. 2 shots. 3 seconds. She began adjusting her scope, running the calculations for both targets. The leader was 471 meters. The dangerous one was 483. 12 meters of difference meant a slight adjustment between shots, a fraction of a second to compensate for the change distance. She could do it. She had trained for exactly this scenario, 2 targets in rapid succession, the kind of shooting that most snipers never attempted outside of a range. Her instructors had called her obsessive. Her fellow students had called her crazy. But she had practiced until her hands knew the movements without her brain having to guide them. The water crept higher. She could feel it touching her boots now, cold and patient, waiting for her to fail. She ignored it. 3 minutes. She settled into her breathing pattern. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. Her heart rate dropped. Her hands steadied. The shaking that had plagued her since she entered the water finally stopped. 2 minutes. Through the scope, she watched the leader, memorizing the angle of his body, the position of his head. She watched the dangerous one, noting exactly where his neck would be when he stretched to look at the sky. 2 targets. 2 bullets. 1 chance. 1 minute. The rain seemed to fall harder, as if the sky itself was trying to stop her. She made a final adjustment to her scope, compensating for the increased precipitation. The math was as perfect as she could make it. Everything else was faith. 30 seconds. The leader glanced at his watch. The dangerous one rolled his neck. Yolanda held her breath and placed her finger on the trigger. And then the nervous insurgent grabbed one of the hostages and dragged her to her feet, shouting something toward the American position, and everything Yolanda had planned fell apart. The nervous insurgent was screaming now, dragging the young woman toward the edge of the bridge where the American position could see her clearly. He pressed his rifle against her temple and gestured wildly with his free hand. Even without hearing the words, Yolanda understood. This was an ultimatum. Surrender, or watch her die. Through the scope, she could see the woman's face, twisted with terror, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. She could see the insurgent's finger on the trigger, trembling with adrenaline. One wrong move, and the hostage was dead. She could not take the shot, not with the rifle pressed directly against the woman's head. Any impact, even a clean kill, could cause the insurgent's finger to spasm on the trigger. The hostage would die either way. Vickers' voice crackled through the radio. Becky, what is happening up there? The center target has a hostage at gunpoint. He is making demands. I do not have a clean shot. Then find one. She wanted to reach through the radio and strangle him. There is no clean shot. He has the rifle against her head. If I fire, she dies. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. 5. Then Vickers spoke again, and his voice was different. Harder. More desperate. Becky, we're out of time here. Delgado is losing blood faster than we thought. Jose is going into shock. If we do not get extraction in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to lose people. So you figure out a way to make this work, or we all die on this bridge. She heard something crack in his voice on the last word. Not contempt this time. Fear. Vickers was afraid, and that scared her more than anything else that had happened today. She scanned the bridge again, looking for any option she might have missed. The leader was still at the north position, watching the nervous insurgents display with what looked like disapproval. The dangerous one on the south end had not moved, still scanning the flood with patient eyes. Neither of them had clear shots either. They were all waiting to see what happened next. And then she saw it. The nervous insurgent was standing at the very edge of the bridge, right where the concrete met the railing. The railing was old, rusted, weakened by years of neglect and months of combat. And directly below his position, barely visible through the rain, was a partially submerged support beam. If she hit that beam at the right angle, the ricochet would travel upward, not with enough force to kill, but enough to startle, enough to make him flinch. And if he flinched, if he pulled the rifle away from the hostage's head for even a second, she would have her shot. It was insane. It was the kind of shooting that existed only in movies and the fever dreams of snipers who had spent too long in the field. The angle was impossible. The timing was impossible. Everything about it was impossible. She began calculating anyway. The radio crackled again, but this time it was not Vickers. This time it was gunfire, sharp and close, followed by a sound that made her blood freeze. Vickers was hit. She heard Delgado screaming, heard the chaos of the team trying to return fire while dragging their wounded leader to cover. Through the scope, she saw the insurgents react, the leader barking orders, the dangerous one rising from his position to get a better angle. They smelled blood. They were moving in for the kill. Becky. Delgado's voice was ragged. Vickers is down. Shoulder wound, arterial bleed. He is conscious, but he cannot command. You're the ranking soldier. What do we do? She stared at the bridge, at the hostages, at the insurgents who were now advancing on her pinned and bleeding team. Everything had fallen apart in the span of 30 seconds. The careful plan, the calculated shots, the precise timing. All of it was gone. She was in command now, and her team was dying. The fear hit her like a wave, cold and paralyzing. She was not ready for this. She was just a sniper, just the woman they had sent on a suicide mission because they did not expect her to succeed. She was not supposed to be making life and death decisions for an entire team. But there was no one else. She keyed the radio. Delgado, keep pressure on Vickers' wound. Do not let him move. Ose, if you can hear me, stay low and stay quiet. I'm going to end this. How? Delgado's voice cracked. There are still 3 of them, and you cannot shoot the one with a hostage. Watch me. She pulled back from the scope and looked at the flood rising around her. The water was at her knees now, soaking through her uniform, numbing her legs. She had maybe 20 minutes before it reached the rifle. Maybe less. 20 minutes to make 3 impossible shots and save everyone she had left. She thought about Marcus, about the water that had taken him, about the guilt she had carried for 17 years. She thought about her mother's voice, about fire and water, about the choice she had made to become someone who never looked away. And then she thought about Annika Cole. Vickers had told her the story once, during a briefing that had turned into something more personal than either of them intended. Annika had been his spotter, his partner, his best friend, the finest sniper he had ever known. And she had hesitated on a shot because months of doubt from men like Vickers had made her second-guess herself. That hesitation had gotten her killed, had gotten 3 others killed. Vickers hated female snipers because he hated himself for what he had done to Annika. He had planted the doubt that killed her, and he had never forgiven himself for it. Yolanda understood now. The doubt was the enemy, not the water, not the insurgents, not even Vickers. The doubt was what killed Annika, and the doubt was what would kill her team if she let it win. She was not Annika. She would not hesitate. She raised the rifle, found the support beam beneath the nervous insurgent's position, and began to calculate the most impossible shot of her life. The support beam was 231 meters away. The angle of incidence would need to be precisely 47 degrees to send the ricochet upward toward the nervous insurgent's position. The bullet would lose approximately 60% of its velocity on impact, meaning the ricochet would not be lethal. But it would be loud. It would spark against the metal, and it would make him flinch. That was all she needed. One flinch. One moment where the rifle pulled away from the hostage's head. She made her adjustments and settled her breathing. The rain was falling harder now, sheets of water that turned the air itself into an obstacle. Through the scope, she could barely see the beam, a dark shape beneath the churning surface of the flood. She would be shooting blind, trusting her calculations more than her eyes. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. Her finger found the trigger. She did not think about Vickers bleeding out behind enemy fire. Did not think about Delgado's desperate voice or Osei's fading pulse. Did not think about the water rising toward her rifle or the patrol boat that could return at any moment. She thought only about the math, the angle, the shot. She fired. The bullet cut through the rain and struck the support beam exactly where she had aimed. The spark was bright even in the gray light, a flash of orange that drew every eye on the bridge. The nervous insurgent jerked backward, startled, and the rifle in his hands swung away from the hostage's head. Yolanda was already moving. The scope shifted 12 degrees to the right, found the insurgent's chest, and her fingers squeezed the trigger before her conscious mind could catch up. The second shot hit him center mass. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, the rifle clattering away, the hostage screaming as she fell to the concrete beside him. 1 down, 2 to go. The leader reacted faster than she expected. He was already moving when her scope found him, diving behind the sandbags, shouting orders to the dangerous one at the south end. She fired anyway, but the bullet sparked off concrete instead of flesh. A miss. Her first miss of the day. Return fire came immediately. The dangerous one had spotted her muzzle flash and was pouring rounds into her position, the bullets cracking against the concrete slabs that shielded her. She pressed herself flat, feeling the impacts shudder through the debris, knowing that her cover would not hold forever. Becky, Delgado's voice was barely audible over the gunfire. You got one. You got one of them. I know. Stay down. She crawled to a new position, keeping low, using the debris as cover. The water was at her thighs now, making movement harder, dragging at her uniform with cold fingers. She ignored it. The rifle was still above the surface. That was all that mattered. The dangerous one stopped firing. She risked a glance through a gap in the concrete and saw him repositioning, moving toward a better angle. He was good, patient. He knew how to hunt a sniper. She knew how to hunt one too. She found a new firing position and pressed her eye to the scope. The leader was still behind cover, invisible. But the dangerous one was exposed for just a moment, his body silhouetted against the gray sky as he climbed to higher ground. 489 meters. Wind from the northwest. Rain pulling the bullet down. She fired. The dangerous one's head snapped back, and he crumpled, sliding down the debris and disappearing into the flood below. 2 down. The leader started screaming. She could hear him even from this distance, his voice raw with fury and fear. He had watched 2 of his men die in less than a minute, killed by a ghost in the water that he could not see. The confidence was gone now. The arrogance was gone. He was just a man with a rifle, alone on a bridge, facing something he did not understand. She almost felt sorry for him. The radio crackled. Becky, this is Vickers. She froze. His voice was weak, strained with pain, but he was conscious. He was alive. Vickers, you should not be on the radio. You need to conserve your strength. I need to tell you something. He coughed, and she heard the wet rattle of blood in his lungs. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about all of it. She kept her eye on the scope, watching the leader's position, waiting for him to show himself. We can talk about this later, Sergeant. There might not be a later. Listen to me. His voice cracked, and for a moment, she heard something she had never heard from Darnell Vickers before. Vulnerability. Annika Cole was my best friend, my partner, and I killed her. Yolanda's finger hovered over the trigger. The leader was still hidden. She had time. She could listen. I spent years telling her she did not belong, Vickers continued. Telling her she was not good enough, not strong enough, not hard enough. I thought I was making her better. I thought I was pushing her to be the sniper I knew she could be. But all I did was plant the doubt that got her killed. She heard the grief in his voice, 17 years of guilt pouring out in a flood as relentless as the one rising around her. She had carried her own guilt for the same amount of time. She understood the weight of it. When I saw you, he said I saw her. And I hated you for it. I hated you because you reminded me of what I did. I told myself I was protecting the team, but I was just trying to make you fail so I would not have to watch another woman die because of me. The leader moved. Just a flash of movement behind the sandbags, a head rising to check the field. Yolanda tracked him with the scope, but did not fire. "Not yet. I'm not Annika," she said quietly. "And I am not going to die today. I know." Vickers' voice was fading, the strength bleeding out of him. "You are better than she was. Better than any of us. Now finish this and bring my team home." The leader rose from cover, rifle raised, trying to find the sniper who had killed his men. He was scared and angry and desperate, and that made him careless. Yolanda exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide. She knew at the moment the rifle kicked against her shoulder, felt the slight tremor in her frozen hands that had thrown off her aim by a fraction of a degree. At 470 meters, a fraction of a degree meant everything. The bullet sparked off the sandbags inches from the leader's head, and he dropped back into cover before she could chamber another round. She cursed under her breath and pulled back from the scope. Her hands were shaking again, the cold finally winning the war it had been fighting since she entered the water. She could barely feel her fingers. The trigger felt like a distant thing, connected to her body by memory rather than nerve. The leader was screaming again, but this time the words were different. He was calling for reinforcements, calling for the patrol boat. "Becky!" Delgado's voice was urgent. "I can hear engines upstream. The boat is coming back." She looked at the water rising around her. It was at her waist now, the current tugging at her uniform, trying to pull her from her position. The rifle was still above the surface, but barely. One more surge and the scope would go under. One more minute and her weapon would be useless. She had to move, had to find higher ground before the flood took her last advantage. But the leader was still alive, and if she moved now, he would see her. She weighed her options. Stay and drown. Move and be spotted. Neither choice led anywhere good. The patrol boat's engine grew louder. She could see it now, rounding the bend upstream, its spotlight cutting through the rain. 3 minutes, maybe less, before it reached her position. 3 minutes to kill the leader and disappear. She pressed her eye to the scope and found the sandbag position. The leader was still behind cover, only the top of his head visible. Not enough for a kill shot. She needed him to move. She keyed the radio. "Delgado, can you draw his fire?" "What?" "I need him to look at your position. Just for a second. Can you make that happen?" The pause that followed was heavy with everything Delgado was not saying. He was wounded. The team was pinned. Any movement could get someone killed. But he understood what she was asking, and he understood why. "Give me 30 seconds, he said. She counted. The boat was getting closer. The water was getting higher. Her hands were getting number. Everything was racing toward a conclusion she could not control. At 23 seconds, she heard gunfire from the American position. A short burst, carefully aimed, enough to draw attention without wasting ammunition. The leader rose from cover to return fire, his rifle sweeping toward Delgado's muzzle flash. Yolanda fired. The bullet caught him in the throat. He staggered backward, hands clutching at the wound, and collapsed against the sandbags. She watched through the scope as he slid to the ground, watched the life drain out of him, watched the bridge go still. 3 down. All targets eliminated. She allowed herself one breath of relief. Then the patrol boat's spotlight swept across her position, and everything went white. She dove. The water closed over her head, cold and dark and absolute, and she felt the rifle case drag against her back as she pulled herself deeper. Above her, she could hear the boat's engine, could see the distorted glow of the spotlight probing the debris field. They had seen her. They knew where she was. She swam blind, using the concrete slabs as guides, pulling herself through the underwater maze with hands that could barely grip. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. The rifle case caught on a piece of rebar, and she felt the strap dig into her shoulder as she fought to free it. Something gave. She heard it more than felt it, a soft pop that traveled through the water like a whisper. The seal. The waterproof seal she had spent 11 hours preparing, tested and retested until she was certain it would hold. It had held through everything. The initial plunge, the underwater crossings, the hours of immersion. But this was one impact too many. She surfaced in a pocket of air beneath a collapsed slab, gasping, and tore open the rifle case. Water poured out. The M24 was soaked, its action flooded, its scope fogged with moisture. She tried to work the bolt and felt it stick, the mechanism grinding against debris that should not be there. The rifle was dead. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal and fought the urge to scream. Everything she had done, every impossible swim, every perfect shot, every moment of refusing to let the doubt win, all of it meant nothing now. She had killed 3 insurgents and saved the hostages, but she was still trapped in a flood with a dead weapon and a patrol boat hunting her. The radio crackled against her chest. Becky report. Delgado's voice was desperate. The bridge is clear. I saw you take the last one. Where are you? She keyed the mic with numb fingers. I am in the debris field. The boat spotted me. I had to dive. Are you hit? Negative. But my rifle is flooded. The seal broke. The silence that followed said everything. Without the rifle, she was just another soldier in the water. No longranje capability. No way to protect her team from whatever came next. Then the spotlight found her again. She saw it pierce through a gap in the concrete, a blade of white light that swept across her hiding spot and froze. She heard shouts from the boat, heard the engine rev as it turned toward her position. She had maybe 60 seconds before they reached her. 60 seconds to figure out how to survive with nothing but a flooded rifle and the knife on her belt. She thought about Marcus, about the water that had taken him, about the 17 years she had spent refusing to let it take her too. Fire does not run from water, her mother had said. Fire makes water into steam. She was not going to die in this flood. Not today. Not ever. She drew her knife and waited for the boat to come. The boat came around the debris pile with its spotlight blazing. 2 men at the bow with rifles raised. They were shouting in Arabic, sweeping their weapons across the water, searching for the sniper who had killed their comrades on the bridge. Yolanda pressed herself against the underside of a concrete slab, only her face above water, the knife clutched in her frozen fist. The spotlight passed over her position once, twice. On the 3rd pass it stopped. One of the men pointed directly at her and opened fire. She dove as bullets tore through the water around her, pulling herself deeper into the debris field, using the concrete maze as cover. The shots were wild, panicked, the men firing at shadows rather than targets. But wild shots could still kill. She felt one round pass close enough to tug at her uniform, close enough to remind her that luck was the only thing keeping her alive. The boat's engine roared as it pushed into the debris field, trying to follow her. She heard metal scrape against concrete, heard the men cursing as the wreckage blocked their path. They could not reach her in the boat. They would have to come into the water. She found a pocket of air and surfaced just long enough to fill her lungs. Through the rain, she could see one of the men climbing over the bow, lowering himself into the flood with his rifle held above his head. He was coming for her. Good. She slipped beneath the surface and moved toward him, using the debris as cover, her knife ready. The water was dark and churned with sediment, visibility reduced to nothing. She navigated by sound, by the vibrations of his movements, by the instinct that 17 years of fighting water had honed to a razor edge. She found his legs first. He was standing on something submerged, trying to keep his balance, trying to see through the murk. He never saw her coming. She grabbed his ankle and pulled. He went under with a scream that became a gurgle. She was on him before he could surface, the knife finding the gap between his vest and his collar, her weight driving him deeper. He thrashed and fought, but the water was her ally now. The water held him down while she did what needed to be done. When she surfaced, he did not follow. The second man on the boat was screaming, firing blindly into the water, the spotlight swinging wildly. He had watched his companion disappear, and he knew what that meant. He knew something was down there, hunting. Yolanda circled around the boat, staying beneath the surface, counting the seconds between breaths. She found the stern where the engine churned the water into foam and pulled herself up the side. The man was still facing the bow, still shooting at the place where she had killed his friend. She came over the gunwale like a wave and put the knife through his back before he could turn. He dropped. The rifle clattered to the deck. The spotlight kept sweeping, automated now, painting the rain with white light, that had no one left to guide it. She stood on the deck of the patrol boat, chest heaving, knife dripping, and let herself feel it. The exhaustion, the relief, the savage satisfaction of surviving something that should have killed her. The radio on her chest crackled. "Becky!" Delgado's voice was shaking. "We heard gunfire. What's happening out there?" She keyed the mic with blood-slicked fingers. "Patrol boat is neutralized. I am commandeering it for extraction. You are what?" She looked at the controls, at the engines still running, at the spotlight still sweeping. The boat was small but functional. It could carry her team. It could get them to the extraction point faster than swimming. "I am bringing a boat," she said. "Get everyone ready to move." She took the wheel and turned the patrol boat toward the bridge. The flood fought her, the current pushing against the hull, but the engine was strong and she was stronger. She had swum through this water. She had killed in this water. She was not afraid of it anymore. The bridge came into view through the rain, and she saw figures moving on the elevated roadway. The hostages were on their feet now, huddled together, staring at the bodies of the men who had held them captive. Delgado was visible at the edge of the American position, waving his arms to guide her in. She brought the boat alongside a section of intact railing and killed the engine. Delgado was there in seconds, helping to secure the line, his face pale with blood loss, but his eyes bright with something she had not seen before. "You killed them," he said. "All of them. The 3 on the bridge and the 2 on the boat." "5 confirmed," she said. "How is Vickers?" "Alive. Barely. We need to move him carefully." She climbed onto the bridge and moved toward the American position. The hostages parted for her, their eyes wide, their faces reflecting something between terror and awe. She ignored them. There would be time for gratitude later. Vickers was propped against a concrete barrier, his shoulder wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, his face gray with shock. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like pride. "Staff Sergeant Becky," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I gave you suicide mission." "Yes, Sergeant. You did, and you turned it into a victory." She knelt beside him and checked his bandages. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. He needed a surgeon. He needed evacuation. He needed to stop talking and conserve his strength. "I need you to stay quiet," she said. "We're getting you out of here." He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes locked onto hers, and she saw the man behind the contempt, the man who had carried his guilt for 17 years and finally found someone who could understand it. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. For doubting you, for trying to make you fail, for being too much of a coward to face what I did to Annika." She looked at his hand on her wrist, at the blood seeping through his bandages, at the rain falling around them like the world was trying to wash everything clean. "Apology accepted," she said. "Now shut up and let me save your life." Loading Vickers onto the boat took 4 of them, Delgado on one side, Yolanda on the other, and 2 of the hostages who had found enough courage to help despite their shaking hands. They moved him as gently as they could, but every shift drew a groan from between his clenched teeth. Jose was easier. The young private had slipped into unconsciousness somewhere during the firefight, her body surrendering to shock and blood loss. Yolanda checked her pulse and found it weak, but steady. She would live if they moved fast enough. The 3 hostages climbed aboard without prompting. The young woman Yolanda had saved from a nervous insurgent was still crying, silent tears that mixed with the rain on her face. The other 2, a middle-aged man and an older woman, sat in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on nothing. Delgado took the wheel. His hands were shaking and his face was the color of old paper, but he knew boats and he knew the river. Yolanda let him work while she moved through the vessel, checking supplies, assessing damage, looking for anything that could help. She found a medical kit beneath one of the seats. Iraqi military issue, battered but intact. Inside were bandages, antiseptic, a single morphine syringe. Not much, but more than they had. She administered the morphine to Vickers first. He tried to refuse, tried to insist that Jose needed it more, but she overruled him. Jose was unconscious. She was not suffering. Vickers was awake, and every bump of the boat sent fresh agony through his shattered shoulder. The morphine took effect within minutes. His face relaxed, his breathing steadied, and his eyes found hers with something like clarity. "How bad is it?" he asked. "You will live," she said. "The bullet went through clean. No major arteries. But you need surgery soon or infection will set in." He nodded slowly, processing the information with the detachment of a soldier who had seen wounds before. "How far to the extraction point?" Delgado answered from a wheel. 3 kilometers downstream. There is a landing zone on the east bank. I radioed ahead while you're clearing the bridge. Medevac is already en route. 3 kilometers. In a flood, with debris everywhere and the current fighting them. It could take 20 minutes or more. Vickers could hold that long. Jose could hold that long. But there was no room for delay. Yolanda moved to the bow and watched the water ahead. The flood had transformed the landscape into something unrecognizable. Familiar landmarks drowned beneath brown, churning chaos. She saw rooftops jutting from the surface, vehicles tumbled like toys, the occasional body floating face down in the current. The river had claimed everything it could reach, but had not claimed her. She thought about the swim, about the hours she had spent fighting the water that wanted to kill her. She thought about the shots she had made, the calculations she had run, the impossible mathematics that had somehow worked in her favor. She thought about the 2 men on the patrol boat, about the knife and the darkness, and the moment when the flood had become her weapon instead of her enemy. She had done things today that she had not known she was capable of. Things that would stay with her for the rest of her life, for better or worse. Delgado's voice cut through her thoughts. "Becky, there is something ahead." She moved to the wheel and followed his gaze. 100 meters downstream, a massive tangle of debris had formed across the river. Uprooted trees, chunks of concrete, the twisted remains of a vehicle. The current was pushing everything toward it, creating a dam that stretched nearly bank to bank. "Can we go around?" she asked. Delgado studied the obstruction, his jaw tight. "Maybe. There's a gap on the east side, but it is narrow. If we hit the debris, we could capsize. And if we go back, we lose 20 minutes finding another route. Maybe more." He looked at Vickers at Jose. "They do not have 20 minutes. Yolanda looked at the gap. It was narrow, barely wider than the boat, and the current was pushing hard toward the debris. One wrong move, and they would be pinned against the wreckage, trapped in the flood with wounded who could not swim. She had spent all day making impossible choices. One more would not break her. "Take us through," she said. "I will guide you from the bow." She moved to the front of the boat and lay flat on the deck, her eyes fixed on the water ahead. The gap was visible now, a dark channel between the debris and the eastern bank. The current was faster there, funneled by the obstruction into a rushing torrent. She raised her hand and began signaling. "Left. Steady. Right." The boat responded to her commands, Delgado working the wheel with desperate precision. The debris loomed larger, reaching toward them like grasping hands. "Steady," she called. "Steady." The boat entered the gap. The current grabbed them and accelerated, pushing them toward the obstruction. She saw a branch scrape along the hull, saw a chunk of concrete pass inches from a bow. The engine screamed as Delgado fought to keep them straight. "Now, hard right." Delgado spun the wheel. The boat lurched, tilted, and for one terrible moment Yolanda was certain they were going over. She heard one of the hostages scream, heard Vickers grunt in pain as his body shifted against the deck. Then they were through. The debris fell away behind them, and the river opened up, wider and calmer, the current still strong but no longer lethal. Yolanda pushed herself up from the deck and looked back at the obstruction they had just navigated. From this side it looked even more impossible. A wall of wreckage that should have stopped them cold. But it had not, because she had refused to let it. Delgado was laughing, the sound high and thin with relief. "We made it. We actually made it." "Keep moving," Yolanda said. "We are not home yet." But she allowed herself a small smile as she said it. They had made it. Against everything, through everything, they had made it. The landing zone came into view 10 minutes later. A flat stretch of bank where the flood had not reached, marked by orange smoke grenades and the distant shape of a helicopter descending through the rain. They were going home. The helicopter touched down as they reached the bank, its rotors whipping the rain into horizontal sheets that stung exposed skin. Two medics jumped out before the skids had fully settled, stretchers in hand, already assessing the situation as they ran toward the boat. Vickers first, Yolanda shouted over the rotor wash. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, arterial involvement, morphine administered 20 minutes ago. The medics moved with practiced efficiency, transferring Vickers to a stretcher with movements so smooth he barely groaned. One of them checked his vitals, while the other started in four-line, the needle finding a vein despite the chaos. Jose was next. The young private had not regained consciousness, her breathing shallow, her skin cold to the touch. The medics exchanged a look that Yolanda did not like, but they loaded her onto the second stretcher without comment. Delgado tried to wave off assistance, insisting he could walk, but his legs buckled the moment he stepped on a solid ground. One of the helicopter crew caught him before he fell and half-carried him toward the open bay door. The hostages went last. The young woman had stopped crying, her face now blank with the particular emptiness of someone who had seen too much to process. The older two moved like sleepwalkers, their bodies going through motions their minds had not yet caught up with. Yolanda counted heads as they loaded. Vickers, Jose, Delgado, 3 hostages, 6 people who would not have survived without her. A hand touched her arm. She turned to find the crew chief, a weathered sergeant with 20 years of flight time etched into his face. Staff Sergeant Becky, he said, you coming or not? She looked back at the flood one last time. The water was still rising, still claiming everything in its path, still hungry for whatever it could take. But would not take her. Not today. Not ever again. I am coming, she said. She climbed into the helicopter and found a seat near the door. The rotors spun up, and the aircraft lifted, banking hard over the flood zone as it climbed toward safety. Through the open bay, she watched the water shrink. Watched the bridge where she had killed 3 men become a tiny shape in a sea of brown. Watched the debris field where she had nearly drowned disappear into the distance. Delgado was beside her, and 4 in his arm, his face still pale, but his eyes alert. He leaned close so she could hear him over the engine noise. 5 kills, he said. 3 on the bridge, 2 on the boat. That is more than anyone in the battalion, this deployment. She did not respond. The numbers did not feel real yet. Nothing felt real. She was still half convinced that she was underwater somewhere, dreaming of rescue while the flood pulled her down. My grandmother would say you've been touched by something, Delgado continued. Something that wanted you to survive. She would probably light a candle for you. Yolanda thought about her mother, about fire and water, about the words that had carried her through the worst day of her life. Tell your grandmother thank you. Delgado smiled, the expression weak but genuine. I will tell her a warrior came home because of her prayers. The helicopter banked again, and Yolanda saw FOB Resolute appear on the horizon. The base looked small from this height, a cluster of buildings surrounded by sandbag walls, untouched by the flood that had devastated everything around it. Home, or the closest thing to home she had in this country. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the exhaustion she had been holding at bay. Her muscles ached. Her hands throbbed. The cold had settled so deep in her bones, she wondered if she would ever be warm again. But she was alive. Her team was alive. The hostages were alive. That was enough. That was everything. The helicopter touched down inside the FOB perimeter, and the chaos began immediately. More medics rushed the wounded toward the aid station. Officers appeared with questions and clipboards. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders and pressed a cup of hot coffee into her hands. She stood in the middle of it all, watching, processing, trying to find her footing on ground that did not move. Captain Heinrich Brandt found her there 10 minutes later. The company commander was a tall man with a face like carved granite, a man who had seen enough combat to be unimpressed by almost everything. But when he looked at Yolanda, something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been respect. Staff Sergeant Becky, he said, I have been getting reports, conflicting reports. I need you to tell me what happened out there. She took a sip of the coffee. It was too hot and too bitter, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. We were ambushed at the bridge, she said. Team was pinned. Sergeant Vickers assigned me to approach through the flood and neutralize the insurgent positions. Vickers assigned you to the eastern approach, Brant said. The suicide route. Yes, sir. And you took it anyway. She met his eyes. I took a different route, one that kept me alive long enough to complete the mission. Brant studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing her words, measuring them against whatever Vickers had told him, calculating the implications. You disobeyed a direct order, he said finally. I made a tactical decision that saved the lives of my team and 3 civilian hostages. If you want to court-martial me for that, I will accept the consequences. The silence stretched between them. Rain drummed against the roof of the aid station. Somewhere inside, doctors were working to save Vickers and Osei. Then Brant did something she did not expect. He smiled. Staff Sergeant, he said, I'm not going to court-martial the soldier who just pulled off the most impressive combat action this battalion has seen in 3 deployments. I'm going to put you in for a commendation, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did today. She did not know what to say. She had spent so long fighting for recognition, fighting against the assumption that she did not belong, that she had forgotten what it felt like to receive it freely. Thank you, sir, she managed. Brant nodded. Now go get warm. Get dry. Get some rest. Debrief is at 0600 tomorrow. I want every detail. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her coffee and her thermal blanket and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being seen for exactly what she was. A sniper. A soldier. A survivor. She had proven herself today. Not to Vickers. Not to Brant. Not to the army or the battalion or the men who had doubted her. She had proven herself to the only person whose opinion truly mattered. She did not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the water, back in the dark, back in the moment when the flood had tried to claim her and she had refused to let it. So she sat on her bunk and watched the rain fall outside her window and waited for morning. The debrief lasted 3 hours. She told them everything, from the first moment she entered the water to the final shot that killed the leader on the bridge. She told them about the patrol boat and the knife and the 2 men she had killed with her hands. She told them about the debris dam and the narrow gap and the moment when she thought the boat would capsize. She did not tell them about Marcus. Some things were not for official reports. When she finished, Captain Brant dismissed the other officers and asked her to stay. He sat across from her in the empty briefing room, his face unreadable. Vickers is going to make it, he said. Surgery went well. He will be evacuated to Germany tomorrow for recovery. And Osei, touch and go for a while, but she's stabilized overnight. Doctors say she will keep the arm. Might even return to duty in 6 months. Yolanda felt something loosen in her chest. She had not realized how tightly she had been holding herself until the tension began to release. Brant leaned forward. I spoke with Vickers this morning. He was lucid enough to give a statement. Do you know what he said? She shook her head. He said he sent you on that mission expecting you to fail. He said he gave you the suicide route because he wanted you to prove him right about female snipers. And he said that you proved him wrong in every way possible. She did not know how to respond to that. The anger she expected to feel was not there. Just a tired acceptance of something she had always known. He also said, Brant continued, that you're the finest sniper he has ever served with. And he wants that on the record. The words hit her harder than she expected. Vickers, who had spent months trying to break her. Vickers, who had carried his hatred of female snipers like a shield against his own guilt. Vickers, who had watched her do the impossible and finally found the courage to admit he was wrong. I will make sure it is on the record, Brant said, along with my own recommendation. You're going to receive the Bronze Star for what you did yesterday, Staff Sergeant, and I'm putting you in for promotion. She found her voice. I was just doing my job, sir. No. Brant shook his head. You were doing the job that nobody thought you could do. There is a difference. He stood and extended his hand. She rose and shook it, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her, like the thermal blanket they had wrapped her in the night before. Dismissed, Staff Sergeant. Get some rest. You have earned it. She left the briefing room and walked out into the FOB. The rain had finally stopped, the first break in the weather in almost 2 days. Weak sunlight filtered through the clouds, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. She found herself walking toward the aid station without consciously deciding to go there. Vickers was inside, sedated for transport, but Delgado was awake and sitting up in bed. He grinned when he saw her. "There she is," he said, "the woman who killed a river." She pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by shrapnel and then spent 6 hours in a flood." "So pretty good, all things considered." He gestured at the 4 in his arm. "They say I will be back on duty in a few weeks. Light duty at first, but still. Good. We need you on the radio." Delgado's grin faded into something more serious. "I heard about the commendation and the promotion. You deserve it, Becky. Every bit of it." She looked at her hands, still raw from the concrete and the cold and the grip of her knife. "I could not have done it without you. The intel you gave me, the patterns you spotted. That made the difference." "I just watched," he said. "You did the shooting." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, she could hear the FOB coming back to life, the sounds of soldiers and vehicles, and the mundane business of war resuming after the flood. "My grandmother called," Delgado said finally. "I told her about you, about what you did. She said she is lighting a candle for you tonight. And she said to tell you something." "What?" "She said the water did not take you because you are not meant to drown. You're meant to flow, to find your own path through the obstacles, like a river that cannot be stopped." Yolanda thought about Marcus, about the lake that had taken him, about the 17 years she had spent believing that water was her enemy. Maybe her grandmother was right. Maybe the water had never been trying to kill her. Maybe it had been trying to teach her something all along. How to flow, how to adapt, how to find the path that no one else could see. "Tell her thank you," Yolanda said. "Tell her I understand." She left the aid station and walked to the edge of the FOB, to the place where the sandbag walls looked out over the flooded landscape. The water was still there, still covering everything, still hungry and patient and eternal. But she was not afraid of it anymore. She had swum through it, fought in it, killed in it. She had let it wash away the doubt that had been weighing her down for years, the voices that told her she did not belong, the fear that she would fail when it mattered most. The flood should have drowned her. That was what everyone would say when they heard the story. The flood should have drowned her, but her sniper stayed dry and ready. But Yolanda knew the truth. The flood had not drowned her because she had refused to let it, because she was fire, not water, because she had made her own path through the impossible and come out the other side. If you connected with this story, drop a comment and share your favorite moment. Or tell us about someone you know who proved the doubters wrong, who found their own path when everyone said it could not be done. We would love to hear from you. She stood at the edge of the water and watched the sun break through the clouds. Tomorrow there would be more missions, more challenges, more moments when the world would try to tell her what she could not do. She would prove them wrong. Every single time. Her rifle was already drying in her quarters. By morning, it would be ready again. So would she.